Hello, hello. Welcome in, everybody. Super excited to cook with you today. My name is Alex. I'm here cooking with Homemade. Very excited to cook with you again. And today we're going to be cooking some stuffed puff pastry pumpkins with American lamb. And really excited to showcase this amazing product. American lamb really makes it easy to figure out where you're sourcing your delicious lamb. Lamb is something, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't love back in the day. Lamb is something I've learned to love over years, and now I can't get enough of it. Ground lamb is the perfect entry point if you're not really used to cooking with lamb, just because it's so easy really to do delicious, amazing things like we're doing today. And as we're moving into hosting season, we're starting to think about things that we can show up to a party. Maybe you're hosting your friends and family. You want to make something that's not only amazingly savory as the weather kind of gets cold, you also want to impress folks. So today I'm really excited because this stuffed puff pastry pumpkin is not only amazingly delicious, it is cute as heck. And American lamb, if you're looking for other lamb recipes, they have an amazing, amazing directory Rolodex of awesome recipes and even tips on sourcing. And so if you're sourcing American lamb, know that you can shave off 10,000 miles of travel time with your lamb and even get it potentially 30 days fresher than if you're getting imported lamb. So without further ado, I'm gonna kind of walk you through some of the steps that we're gonna dive into today. And if you have any questions, I wanna make sure you can direct them to my friend Amy. You can say hello.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, and you can drop them in the chat and she'll direct them my way and answer them as well. And so we're gonna walk you through some of the steps here. First, we're gonna start browning the meat. And so we're gonna saute up some garlic here, brown the meat with some herbs, and then we're gonna start assembling our puff pastry, and we're gonna layer all kinds of delicious ingredients. We're gonna fold that up, and we are gonna give it a little egg wash. And typically at home, you're gonna give it some time to chill, and then we're gonna pop it in the oven. So we're gonna get to cooking, everybody. So first things first, we're gonna get a nice, fairly deep saute pan, and this is, again, just to brown the meat. And why do we brown the meat? Partly it's just to activate all of those flavors. You could probably cook the meat most of the way if you're popping it in the oven, but it's really important that we incorporate those flavors. So what we're doing right now is we're browning the meat. And so I talked a little bit in the past about some of the science of what's going on when you're browning meat, and that's called the Maillard reaction. And so that browning the meat is basically breaking down proteins, breaking down sugars in the meat. And so as it's browning, you want to really make sure that you're getting it at a high heat. You can't really brown meat at a low temperature. So you can cook meat, but it's not going to get brown. So you really want to make sure you heat your pan up to fairly hot. So I've got it all the way up cranking. We don't need much oil because we really just want to prevent the lamb from sticking. There's a high fat content in that lamb. And so we're just going to use about a teaspoon of oil, just enough to really coat the bottom of the pan. And then we'll kind of spread it around a little bit. And then we really just want to make sure that once that oil is hot, kind of shimmering, spread around the pan, we're just about ready to drop our garlic. And so I'm going to mince 1 clove. What I love about this dish is that there's really not an insane amount of seasoning. It's the herbs that are doing the talking, and it's the quality of this really yummy, tasty lamb that has a high fat content. We're getting that good fat from the flavor of the lamb, a little bit of those kind of like earthy, grassy notes that you get from lamb that you're not going to get if you use something like pork or beef. And so that's one of the reasons why we love lamb for this dish. And so we're just going to mince this up, and it's going to be a pretty fine mince. One of my tricks, I like kind of throwing down some salt on the board. You've seen that before. And that's just to kind of make it easier to finish mincing. So in that first part of the mince, we're gonna just very quickly, directly 90 degrees down, being very careful of your fingers. Mince, mince, mince. And I threw that salt down just to kind of help me in those last stages of mincing. Now that I got it most of the way minced, I'll move it over to that salt, finish mincing, and I'll throw a little bit more salt down and kind of use this to finely mince it, puree a little bit, and we'll kind of press it a little bit. Release some of those juices from that delicious garlic. Just a real quick flash, probably about a minute. We'll stir it around. Ooh, we know the pan is hot because it's sizzling as soon as it hits, so that's a good indicator. And so we're gonna give this a quick little stir. Again, we got this at medium heat. We're gonna just saute it for a second. And this is just going for about a minute. We're gonna pick our herbs now at the moment. So we have rosemary and thyme. Rosemary, I think, is gonna be an especially loud herb that I think is important for this dish. Rosemary and lamb, there's something about the way the two go together, they just dance. And this is just about 4 ounces. This might be just a little bit more, but we have about 4 ounces of lamb. We're gonna dump it directly in, and once I get it there, it's kind of in this big mass. It's almost looking like a little bit of a burger patty, and we wanna break it up. Trying to break it up into little chunks as much as possible, because we're gonna have it in very, very small ground chunks at the end, and basically spreadable crumbles. That's what we're looking for. And we're gonna continue cooking this until it's brown. Now would be a good time to salt, pinch of salt, maybe about a 1/4 teaspoon, not a lot, pinch of pep. And then we'll get with mincing our rosemary. Find a neighbor with some rosemary and they will probably be your friend. If you tell them you're gonna go and harvest it every week, they will be your friend. It is a weed, but it's a delicious one. Got the rosemary. We'll get some thyme. Kind of easy way to pick the thyme is to go against the grain. So I kind of point it down and basically use gravity to pull the leaves down. Gravity is your friend.
Sometimes it takes a second for the smells to waft over here, but it just made it. I can
Love
smell it.
it.
It smells good.
Smell-o-vision has been activated. Starting to change colors, but it's definitely not starting to brown. So now that that garlic is not burnt, that's when I wanted to turn the temp down. I'm gonna turn the temp back up to make sure that we're reaching that 300-degree temp for it to brown. So you can hear the difference. Once I turned up the heat, that crackle, that sizzle, we're doing things, we're cooking, folks. So it's not gonna need a whole lot of time now. Time, as I throw in the thyme. That wasn't an intentional pun, but it was one. And you can be creative. If you have access to other herbs, I think the rosemary is a really crucial herb, but if you have other herbs, say maybe you have some fresh oregano in place of thyme, I bet that would be good too. And then we're almost fully browned. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the heat off because I think we're there. It's very important to let your lamb cook. Sorry, it is to cook, obviously, but also to cool. In addition to cooking, to cooling. Because why? We're using puff pastry dough, and puff pastry dough is a little temperamental when it comes to temperature. And so we wanna make sure that we leave the butter, which is one of the main things that makes the puff pastry flake and steam as it's cooking. We wanna make sure that we keep that butter cold. So the puff pastry I left in the fridge until right before we're about to cook, and I just took it out here. We have some pre-made puff pastry. So this is one of the awesome things about this recipe is that you can use puff pastry, which can be challenging to make, especially if you don't have the right laminator or you don't wanna spend the hour to do it. So we're using pre-made puff pastry for this, but it's really important that we cool this lamb so that if we were just put this hot lamb directly on top of the puff pastry, it could cause that butter to melt. So I'm gonna put this in the fridge here, but I have some pre-cooled lamb just to kind of speed things up a little bit. One thing I like to think about when I'm baking and making a mess with flour is like, how do I create less cleanup for myself? Me, I live in a pretty small apartment with a pretty tiny kitchen, and it does the job. I've cooked a lot of food in there, but I don't have a lot of counter space. And since I don't have a lot of counter space, I think this is something that home cooks can really do to make cleanup easier. Rather than flouring something directly on your countertop, you could do it on a sheet pan. And that just makes it super easy to clean up at the end. So I'll flour this directly, and I can just give this a quick rinse. So we are just kind of coating this evenly. We're spreading it around. And this is really just so that the puff pastry doesn't stick as we're kind of playing with it. And so I laid down this twine. I had here 4 pieces of twine, and I laid them down first in a cross and then in another cross. And so I basically just created a star. Now we will lay down the puff pastry. And so most of the puff pastry that you're getting store-bought is going to come in the size basically that we need, which is about a 10 by 10 square. And so we're going to lay it directly down here in the center of the X as much as possible. That's looking like it's pretty close. And then we are going to lay down this brie. Baked brie is a classic. This kind of, to me, is the grown-up version of baked brie. And I think about also ways that you can dress your food up and create kind of like either whether it's a character, bring it to life. One of those things that I think of is like the pancakes with the chocolate chips as the face or something like that. I feel like this is almost like the more sophisticated adult version of that in some ways, right? And so here we have the twine already ready to go, and basically now we're gonna start assembling. And so we're gonna spread these 2 tablespoons of apricot jam, just kind of nice and evenly over the top of that brie. And this is when we're gonna fold the corners in. And so we're gonna go folding a corner in, little by little.
Oh, chef, sorry, I know you just did some hard work on assembling there, but
Yeah.
I think on top of your...
Yes, is the lamb. We need the lamb.
Yes.
This is why we need people checking me here. I'm too excited. I made it perfectly the first time, and then I got too excited here. It happens. But this is why we cook with friends, right? I'm here having fun, and I'm having so much fun that I just want to eat the dang thing. But this is why I have y'all. But here we are. So take 2. We're going to fold again. We're there. Folding, folding, folding. And then we're going to crimp, recrimp. And now it's looking much more like a ball. So this is looking much more like a pumpkin shape than it was before as a cylinder. So we're getting to that pumpkin shape, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do to continue getting there. We're going to fold up, continue crimping, take 2, right? And then we are going to fold up the last one here. Crimp that last little corner. All right. How are we going to get it from being this square to slightly more of a circle situation? Well, that's where this twine comes in. And so we're going to start little by little tying each one of these. And we're going to tie it so that it's not as tight as you possibly can, but you definitely see that as you're starting to tighten it, it's starting to leave some indentations in the dough. That's what we're looking with. That's what's going to give us these lines to basically make it look a little bit more like a pumpkin, right? So I'm going to cut this extra twine here. And the reason for that is because we're going to flip this over. And so if you don't cut this, it's all going to get baked basically into this, and it's going to be a pain in the butt to take off when we're finishing up as we're baking. So that's why you cut off the twine. It'll just make it easier at the end. And we're going to kind of continue tying this and get it to that pumpkin shape. And so what am I doing here? Now that we have this all wrapped up, I turned it over, and I'm just brushing off some of the extra flour because we really just wanted that not to have it stick. We don't really need that to help it with the baking or anything. But at this point, we're going to put it on our parchment-lined baking sheet, and we are going to brush with a little bit of egg. So this is just 1 egg here. Got this pastry brush here, and we're just going to kind of spread it evenly. And why am I doing this? This is to basically help the dough brown evenly. This is going to give it that kind of nice, help it with that flaky brown crust type situation that's just going to be kind of on the outside, and help with the presentation, help with the browning, and flavor too. Get that kind of outer layer of delicious flakiness as you're biting into it. And we're going to bake this for about 20 to 25 minutes. And that's at 425, so fairly high heat with the puff pastry to kind of get it to activate in the way that we want.
Jeff, I know you said it already, but why you flipped it over, can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this side that shows the twine, not on the side where I tied it. You see here, I flipped it over because this is the side that we want to present. So when we serve our pumpkin, this is the more presentable side. And so we want this side to be kind of like fully rising and flaky. The bottom is not really what we care as much. And then the nice thing is that we have some time now to assemble everything. And this is when you can really think about, as it's baking, to think of some ways to customize this for your own little charcuterie type spread. So in our case, we're keeping it pretty simple. Apples, that's a pretty classic brie combo for a baked brie. We are also doing some baguette slices, and so we're gonna continue with that. And there's definitely some starch coming from different angles, but I feel like when you're eating this amount of good cheese, you gotta have it paired with enough starch in terms of dipping. So this is where the bread comes in. And so I'm gonna cut this just at a bias. And so what does that mean? Basically, I'm turning this at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm doing that just to create bigger slices. And we're cutting these slices at about probably like 1/3 of an inch thick. That's about what it looks like to me. Whenever I like putting bread in the oven, just almost as a little bit of a crostini type situation. Sometimes it can be nice putting a little bit of olive oil on, but in this case, we're really not trying to get a crostini situation. We're just warming it up and toasting it a bit. So probably about a few minutes. And then while that's going, I can get these apples. And we're gonna slice these pretty thin, so maybe less than a 1/4 inch. And I'm gonna put these in some water with a little bit of lemon juice here. Why am I doing that? Because apples oxidize, which is a fancy way of saying they turn kind of ugly and brown when they get exposed to too much air. So I'm putting them in some citrus, which kind of prevents that, slows down, doesn't prevent, but it slows down that process of oxidization to have them nice looking when I get on the plate. Like if you're going to take this dish and travel somewhere, I would leave them in the water citrus mix basically until you're about to serve them. And then you can kind of pat them down with just a little bit of paper towel. All right. We are getting close. I can even smell a little bit of that brie baking from the oven. That melty cheese smell is just kind of creeping out at me. It's exciting. It's exciting. Our apples, we can take them out and kind of drain them and give them a good shake. We'll pat them dry in this paper towel. That's going to help. And so we're going to think about kind of fanning out these apple slices, right? And so I'm basically kind of reassembling it as much as possible. Doesn't need to be perfect, but fanning out the apple slices can be really great. If you want to go above and beyond, you could even like fan out different colors, alternate colors, red, green. But we're just thinking about like, how do I make this easy and still look very, very nice? And then here's what we kind of think of like layering ingredients. And what I like doing with the bread is kind of creating like a little bit of a snake, right? So it's almost like it's winding back and forth. But there's a number of different ways that you can make this look pretty. All right, and this is what the finished product should look like, or something along those lines. Everybody's shape is going to be a little different, but you'll see there's the lines of the twine. And so what I did is I basically flipped it over, and then I cut the twine just kind of one by one. And then you're going to have to turn this over and just pull the twine gently. And so for me, one of the best things that was helpful was a spatula. It's going to be hot right now, so you're going to want to let it cool a little bit before you do this. Don't try and take it directly out of the oven and take the twine off. Let it cool for at least 5 to 10 minutes. And at that point, it's going to be safe enough to touch, and it's going to be less risky in terms of the whole thing falling apart. We don't want that, right? And so say this is cool for 10 minutes. We've turned it over. We've cut the twine with scissors. I think that's probably the safest way as opposed to a knife. And this is where we move into the little garnishing and make this thing cute as heck. So this is when we stick in our cinnamon stick, and I'm just kind of sticking it in as an angle. If you have shorter cinnamon sticks, great. Not all good. Stick it in as an angle. And then here we have, I left the sage pretty intact, so I didn't pick each leaf. I left it at the stem. And so the reason for that is because we're just going to kind of stick it in and let that look like the leaves of the pumpkin. And so we're ready to go there. I think it's time to eat. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah? All right. Yum. And so yours is going to be even more melty, more delicious, because it's going to be even hotter, right? So I put this in just enough to kind of re-blast that cheese and get it melty. But everyone at home, you're going to have even better cheesy deliciousness, I promise you. Hopefully we got it just melty enough here to get the gist of it, and let's see how it tastes. Hope everything worked out cooking at home, everybody. Oh yeah. It's definitely looking nice, but like I said, everyone at home, you're gonna have some seriously more melty, delicious, stringy cheese action. So I'm especially excited for everyone at home. All right. Without further ado, let's give it a taste. So much savory goodness. The umami notes of the lamb really play with the sweetness of the apricot jam. This is a truly savory fall dish. Hope everyone had fun cooking tonight. Thanks so much for joining me. Thanks to American Lamb. And thanks everybody for joining me. Our next class is going to be an easy holiday feast, which is going to be on Thursday. Thanks so much, everybody.